Morning to one and all present here. I am Afreen Kalaso, the Assistant Director for University Engagements and Partnership at LSAC Global. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar on the topic, The Impact of AI on Diversity, the Bright and the Dark Side of AI in Law, organized by LSAC Global under the Discover Law campaign. At LSAC Global, our goal is to ease the process of law school enrollments for law aspirants. We, as well as the special guests today on our panel, are with you in that journey. And we want to take this opportunity to help our law aspirants to gauge as to what lies ahead of them in this journey. On that note, I would actually like to begin by paying our regards to Professor Dr. Shamnath Bashir on his 45th birth anniversary today. Dr. Bashir was an influential lawyer and a pioneering academician who shaped the course of IP law and policy in India and initiated the groundbreaking initiative of having an increasing diversity in legal fraternity by founding IDIA, that is, increasing diversity by increasing access, a non-for-profit organization that empowers underprivileged children in India by giving them access to quality education. He has truly been an inspiration for us in the legal fraternity. To take this forward, we at LSAC Global instituted the Shamnath Bashir Access to Justice Scholarship Essay Competition last year, and we will be continuing with the efforts by awarding the same this year. The Shamnath Bashir Access to Justice Scholarship is based on an essay competition, and we will award up to maximum rupees 4 lakhs to student who submits the winning essay. The winning student must be registered for the LSAT India test, and the scholarship will cover the tuition and hall of residence fee for the first year of the law program at the LSAC Global Law Alliance College. Today, if I have to tell you about the topic of the essay topic is how might the introduction of artificial intelligence tool in the legal profession mitigate bias, increase access to justice, and promote diversity in the society. We wish to address a few of these issues around this topic through this webinar today. The aim of the webinar is to help students understand the new developments happening in the legal space. The tools of artificial intelligence have already been adopted in the legal system all around the world. However, there are certain myths and realities surrounding the use of AI technology which really need to be addressed. So the aim of the webinar is to deep dive into busting some of the myths and exploring the impact of AI on law. So before we move on to the discussion, let me begin with introducing today's panelists. Today on our panelists, we have Mr. Renegal McGee. Mr. McGee became the Assistant Dean at Howard University School of Law at the age of 26. He currently serves as the Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Admissions and is well known for his innovative ideas and dedication to help the future of law school and the profession. He also consults in the areas of expertise for law school admissions, data modeling, forecasting, diversity and inclusion, and how educational access impacts emerging communities. So we are glad to have you on the panel today. We also are extremely honored to have Ms. Swati Agarwal. Swati is the director of IDIA. She completed her BA LLB honors from NLSIU University, Bangalore, before going to do her LLM in West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. At IDIA, Swati is the director in charge for communications and outreach. She also handles and oversees the operations in Punjab, Haryana, and the Himachal Pradesh chapters. Thank you, Swati, for taking out time today. We're also delighted to have amongst us Mr. Apar Gupta. Apar is a lawyer and the executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. The Internet Freedom Foundation is an Indian digital liberties organization that seeks to ensure that technology respects fundamental rights. Apar completed his postgraduate studies from Columbia University School of Law, and he also practiced for more than a decade. After graduation, he moved and worked as a commercial litigator in top law firms in India. He's also very committed to advancing values of Constitution of India in the digital and the technological society. Thank you, Apar, for taking up time for this special webinar today. Last but not the least, we have on our panel Professor Saket Sharma. Professor Saket works as a senior faculty with School of Law, UPS. He also holds a position of entrepreneur evangelist with UPS Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and closely works with Startup Uttarakhand to nurture the startup ecosystem there. He has a diverse experience in academics, policy research, training, and designing professional courses in niche areas of competition law, intellectual property law, regulation of technology, and technology transfer for students as well as professionals. He writes, conducts presentations and sessions in these areas regularly. Sir, we really look forward to your inputs in today's session. Thank you so much. So before we start off our discussion on the impact of AI, I would actually want to start off with Swati, because on this special day, we celebrate late Professor Shamnath's birth anniversary. I would want you to actually highlight IDIA's work so far, its role, its vision and mission in the legal fraternity.
Thank you. I just want to say a few words about Professor Shamnath Bashir. And I just want to say that he was personally an inspiration for many of us. He founded this organization called IDIA in 2010. So it's been 11 years with a mission to make sure that the legal education is diverse and inclusive. So he was actually teaching in a college called NUJS in West Bengal, which is one of the top law colleges of the country, when he noticed that the class demographics largely consists of people from certain similar cities and backgrounds and more privileged backgrounds, so to say. So he decided that that's a gap that is very problematic because legal education and law is a very empowering tool for communities. And who to better represent the communities than people from the communities themselves. That's why he started IDIA. So what IDIA does is, firstly, we conduct sensitization in schools and communities about legal education because there is little knowledge about national law schools and legal education in the country. And there are a lot of myths about lawyers and the legal profession which are not so positive, which we try to dispel. We select and train students to crack law entrance examinations, and these students are from underrepresented, marginalized, and underprivileged backgrounds. And they are students with disabilities and students from diverse backgrounds, basically. And we train them to crack these law entrance exams. And once they get into top law colleges, we give them a scholarship for next 5 years. So so far, we have trained, we have sensitized over 50,000 students and have trained over 500 students now and have had more than 100 scholars studying in law colleges. This is deeply what we do.
Thank you, Swati. And I think his work has been something which has been appreciated, like I mentioned earlier, and a lot of law students and law fraternity and stakeholders really inspire from what Sir has given back to the society. So my next question would be diverted to Mr. McGay. Mr. McGay, could you share with the audience your journey from a partner at a law firm to the associate dean of students affairs and admission at Harvard School of Law, and what inspired you to take up this role?
Yes, well, first let me start by saying, good evening, and I'm happy to spend this time with you today. When I first think about my journey into the law, I'm very fortunate that I can say that I came from a background where, although I'm the first person in my family to be a lawyer, I had very supportive parents. And at a very early age, I think I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer. And then they put a system of support around me to make sure that I was researching and gaining knowledge and gaining access to opportunities so that I would be eventually prepared for the opportunities to enter a law school. I think that that's such the core of our conversation today, is making sure that we're preparing access and opportunity. And I was very fortunate to eventually matriculate at a wonderful law school where I now work, which is Howard University School of Law. And while I was at the law school, I was not only inspired by the rich history and culture of our institution, but also the mission of our institution, which is to make sure that we provide and train lawyers to underserved and underrepresented communities to make sure that the US legal system and the global legal system is as fair and as equitable as possible. Now, my journey to Howard actually started because upon graduation from law school, practicing law and then being inspired to make sure that the opportunities I was provided with was given to others that followed me. I was very fortunate that my law school asked me if I wanted to return and work at the institution, which I happily accepted. And what I thought would be a short window has evolved to a 17-year journey that I'm very proud to say that I've been a part of, not only an institution that I love, but I know has a true impact and a true ability to move the needle towards justice and inclusion. So, I think, organizations like the Law School Admissions Council and programs created like Discover Law all are born from that same central tenet of access, making sure that students who may not have privilege and direct access aren't barred from the profession because of the resources that can be provided to them to make sure that they have opportunity.
Thanks for that. And I believe that when it comes to access, technology has really played a big role in terms of accepting and keeping that sort of an equality in mind. So, that brings me to the next question, and it's directed to Apar here. Apar, according to you, what is AI and how is the same being used in the law and the legal profession?
So, artificial intelligence comes and is defined in several applications with respect to any kind of digital system which is automating a level of decision making. Essentially, it removes the human from the equation, and it comes with respect to, if you look at logbooks which were there, which many people in my generation have not looked at, which make computational problems for mathematicians much easier, because those logbooks already have those solutions, to today where we sit, and it is fairly simple and easy to have computers do a range of computational functions. That is a digital level of processing which is automated. So we are today much more advanced in the application of this kind of automation, which is giving it the perception of human intelligence, where there are very large data sets. And if you look at existing literature, it is also going beyond what are the conventional models of what is the basis to how these systems are devised, which is essentially cataloging a large number of interactions which human beings have, and then determining predetermined outputs on the basis of it. So largely, when data is inputted, it gives a range of different eventualities and conditionalities, which are then determined how human beings reasonably interact and what are the preferred outcomes. So when a system does it in an automated function, based on a certain environment or a certain participation or a certain desired outcome is presented. But today there is artificial intelligence which is going towards the extent where it learns not only on the basis of input data or observation, but is also able to achieve those outcomes without that big data being inputted into it. I would say that the technical understanding of this is present in several books now. I would recommend Super Intelligence by Nick Bostrom or Life 4.0 by Nick Tegron, which I have found to be personally useful as a lawyer. And I will stop here. In terms of interaction with law and legal systems, the comments by Swati as well as by the Associate Dean, Mr. Professor McGee, indicate that law is a profession which gives a huge amount of chance to social transformation. And that is the same potential artificial intelligence holds. However, artificial intelligence due to its power, also has the tendency quite often to reinforce existing social inequality when it is applied in certain conditions. For instance, policing, municipal permits, or if you would look at 3 or 4 other deployments which are cataloged in a book called Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks. So it says housing discrimination. So that is why it is very important for lawyers, for judges, for people who are centered on ideas of social justice and constitutional values, to engage very deeply with the process of AI within legal systems, but also in forms and systems of governance.
Right, Apar. I think you make a very important point here, specifically how the legal profession actually needs it, and specifically why it will actually help in terms of curbing some sort of a biased opinion when it comes to certain judgments. My next question would be directed to Professor Saket, and we would want to know, and the audience would like to know, that how are law schools helping law students to incorporate technology learning in their curriculum? Because ultimately, these are the students who will go and start practicing in these fields. So, have the law schools really retooled themselves in terms of legal curriculum?
Thanks, Afrin. So, coming to the law school specifically, I can share our experience here. And being a premier law school in India, our focus has been to develop these niche curriculum. Specifically, if you look at the specializations we offer, we have a very unique specializations, which is BTech, LLB, and cyber law. So that is bachelor's in technology. Specifically, it's a law degree. Just you have specializations further in law, cyber law, or intellectual property rights. So students are grounded first. They are given background, thorough knowledge of engineering. So even I see my students developing software themselves. So our students, therefore, they are working not only from legal perspective, but they are developing software as such, and they're applying them. And therefore, from that perspective, I see these courses plus our curriculum, where we have wonderful library resources, plus being a law school which is in a university setup, because that helps. So students can easily collaborate with students from business school, students from engineering, and therefore this collaborative setup, as I'm working also on startup ecosystem. So I can share the example of our startup also, which is JRC Intern, which is basically AI based startup only. And that role of that startup is, that is basically a talent management platform that is connecting pre-qualified law students with internship opportunities at various law firms. And they are using this artificial intelligence based software to screen the candidates. And therefore, they're making the process more transparent, easy for students also. So this way, the way we have developed our curriculum, we are giving the opportunities to the students not only learn, but also apply these things. And rest, I think I will share as the discussion continue more. And specifically, I would also like to acknowledge my regards for late Professor Shamnath Bashir. I have also interacted with him a number of times, and I must acknowledge that he was really a wonderful person, inspiring soul, and he has inspired me also because of various interactions we had with them. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Professor, for those kind words, and thank you for acquainting us with the fact that how law schools are actually, integrating technology in their legal curriculum, which will definitely benefit the lawyers in the future, because you cannot actually work in isolation. Technology has somehow creeped in every aspect of our lives, so it's really important to embrace this and move ahead with technology. And it brings me to our next question, and this is directed to Meghay. Sir, you have relentlessly worked on issues of diversity and inclusion in law. What is your take on the changing legal scenario, number one? And secondly, how do you think technology has enabled in mitigating this bias and has helped in promoting diversity and inclusivity?
Well, I think that that's a wonderful question. And I definitely think that, there has to be an underlying understanding of artificial intelligence. It's neither good nor bad. I think artificial intelligence will simply be a tool that we'll use, and it will either help or it will hinder the goals that we've put in place. I think that right now at its infancy, uh, it's an amazing time in the legal profession because as artificial intelligence is integrated into our practice areas, into our law schools, into the profession, those individuals that are at the infancy have a true opportunity to enter the profession via law firms, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, rules, regulations, case law, and conversations, and set policies, procedures, and regulations that hopefully will make sure that the technology used is fair and unbiased. Right now, that's another reason why we have to make sure that we're diversifying the profession, because if you have anything where there's only one perspective or one socioeconomic background or one type of individual that's building the foundation and the structure, then that's an area that's ripe for bias to seep in or for discrimination or some type of unfair perspective, or even just being siloed and myopic. So we want to make sure that we're presenting opportunities, and I think technology is a wonderful way to do that. The Law School Admissions Council this year was able to offer a number of international virtual law fairs. And, we were able to speak with tens of thousands of students in a way that we would have never been able to speak to those students without reliance on technology. And that reliance on technology gave us access to those students and those students access to law schools. And with that access is an opportunity to start a conversation. And in that opportunity to have a conversation is the opportunity to build relationships and hopefully expand those opportunities and access to legal education to those students. But technology created that. But at the heart of that technology, there were individuals behind that technology that were sitting and having conversations, and more importantly, being at the table to talk about underrepresented groups and socioeconomic disadvantage, and to make sure that there were models in place so that we could look at internet access and cost of attendance and things of that nature. And because of those diverse conversations, then we're able to build better solutions to some of society's problems.
Thank you, Professor, for that. And it takes me to our next question, and this is directed to Swati here, because as Sir had mentioned that how technology has actually enabled them to reach to the right audience and get a sense of an idea as to these marginalized communities, how better they can be represented. How do you feel technology has enhanced the access to legal education, especially with your initiatives at IDIA? Could you give us some instances or share some sort of examples how it has helped?
Sure. Like I think it's been mentioned before by Apar also, like technology is a tool, and it depends on how we incorporate it, and based on that it can either lead to promotion of the existing social inequities or help in bridging the gap between diversity and inclusion. So just to give you an example, that we recently had a training program in collaboration with Enable India, in which we taught students with disabilities studying in various law schools about using computers and various legal databases using the screen reader technology, which is a technology that reads out what's there in the screen and helps them navigate various software. So earlier, when physical libraries are something which would not be accessible to someone with visual impairment. But now with technology, we have enabled them to access case laws and articles which are available online, which they wouldn't have been able to do so earlier. But at the same time, the legal databases and platforms need to work to make sure that their platforms are screen reader friendly, that they are friendly towards people with visual impairment. So it's very important how technology is deployed. Then there are certain existing gaps currently, especially in India, which lead to technology not being as useful in bridging diversity and inclusion as it has potential to be. For example, this year we conducted by last month, we had conducted over 14,000 We had reached out to over 14,000 students with our sensitizations, in which we talked to them about legal profession, legal education, because we shifted to an online system. This is more than what we have done in any other year. And this is just half the year gone. But at the same time, there are a lot of students who and a lot of schools and communities who do not have internet access, who do not have smartphones or laptops, or there's just one smartphone in the house which is being used by everybody. So we cannot reach out to them. Earlier, we could reach out to them by physically visiting them. So it's a double-edged sword, but it has great potential to help bridge the gaps of diversity and inclusion when it comes to legal field and the legal profession.
Right. Thank you, Swati. I know that as a country, we do face this sort of an access when it comes to technology, because there won't be too many smartphones, available for people in one house. And right now, with this whole pandemic situation, as everything has moved online, even education has moved online, it has become a little difficult in terms of students to cope up with this, system. But however, it's actually given a lot of opportunities as well when it comes to having that sort of an access, which probably classrooms could not provide at one point of time. And this actually brings me to Professor Saket here, that could you also share, like you already said, that how UPS has actually gone ahead and integrated the AI system in their day-to-day function of internships and placements. Can you share how technology or the introduction of AI is shaping the legal profession per se in India?
Yes, thank you. So, as I heard correctly, how legal profession is shaping up due to artificial intelligence. So here, of course, I must say that it is at nascent stage, and might have heard about the recent Supreme Court initiative also on this. That Supreme Court has set up this artificial intelligence-based portal, SUPACE, which is meant for assisting judges with legal research. It is Supreme Court portal for assistance in courts efficiency. So basically, at this point of time, Supreme Court of the Apex Court basically is focusing on how AI can assist the judges, and a tool which collects the relevant facts and that basically simplifies the work for judges. So all that pre-litigation stage work, okay, that is being handled by artificial intelligence, and therefore it helps not only the judges but of course the litigants also to get the workload, because India is known for this heavy workload on the judiciary. The real challenge here is how it percolates down the system, because this requires, of course, keeping in view this pandemic, we all are moving towards these things, but how it percolates, you need robust dynamic systems at the base, courts also, not just the Apex Court. So also you need trained professionals who cater to these systems. So that ecosystem needs to develop. And when we talk about its ecosystem, we can see that some startups are also coming in this era where they are focusing on how to develop this case management system for law firms or lawyers, which will help them. Some AI-based startups are also coming up. So here we see public, means government, and private side both are taking some initiatives. But there are challenges there, as rightly said by panelists. So artificial intelligence, if there are some biases there, artificial intelligence can amplify those biases. So therefore, a very cautious approach, you can say, needs to be taken at this point of time. But some of the disputes which can be handled online, or basically systems which are technology driven, like online dispute resolution, ODR systems, we say, like Reserve Bank of India, RBI, they said that recently they came up with this circular for banks and non-banks, that they need to implement this ODR system for disputes and grievances for failed transactions. So a step-by-step approach you can see. And what we say specifically in fintech law, that regulatory sandbox approach means you try to keeping into this technology based things, you try to experiment this at specific group of people, and based on the outcome you slowly and slowly improve the system, okay, and then expand it. So this example, as I gave you, of for online dispute resolution ODR for digital payments transactions, you can see specifically India. There's a lot of talk on AI. It emerged after the Niti Aayog paper 2018, which came. 2018, there was this paper on AI and how it can help in various sectors, health, education, manufacturing, all those things. And if you look at, again, coming back to the law and dispute resolution, or if I talk about my area, intellectual property policy, intellectual property law, again, here you see in 2018 only, Indian Patent Office, they came up with this expression of interest, like how artificial intelligence or blockchain or these technologies can be used to enhance the patent processing system. Already, we are using some now the fully automated digital system, but now the regulators themselves want to apply these new AI-based systems, and therefore, as I said, more so it is an experimentation stage. Regulatory sandbox approach, as I said, needs to be followed here also, to so that you learn and then slowly build upon, so that you are very cautious in your approach, that you don't amplify the biases which AI can have.
Right, Professor. Thank you for sharing those examples. I think the audience has actually learned a lot in terms of how the AI system is being implemented in our everyday, or in the, especially in the legal profession, how it is being integrated. And you gave the example of Supace, and I think in 2019 also we had an AI technology which was introduced in the Supreme Court called SUVAS, which is basically a tool which was helping in terms of translating English to certain vernacular languages, especially legal documents. So that brings me to my next question, and that is directed to Apar here. That it seems like the judiciary is actually not shying away from taking step towards integrating AI, in the everyday working system. What are your comments on that? And do you think a young lawyer needs to start having those sort of equipments available to him, and him being acquainted with these developments happening in technology and in the cyber world?
So the way we need to view technology in legal systems needs to be with a sense of welcome, but also with a sense of caution. It's almost counterintuitive. And I say these things drawing not only from my experience, but also just looking at the work of so many other scholars. Because quite often there are inherent human biases which are present, which will manifest themselves in these systems. And the human bias by an individual can be easily encountered and checked in my experience, but when it is placed at the heart of the system by itself, it's much more difficult to question it. Now, what are the answers to this lie in several oversight and specifically doctrines of transparency, for instance, in design of these systems, and opening it up to oversight and critique by experts prior to adoption. And let me just take the instance of Supace and the AI committee. So it's launched on 6th of April 2021. Its full form is Supreme Court Portal for Assistance in Courts Efficiency. The literature around how this system functions, the product design, the technical functions, they are not made available in public. So what is this deployment? We don't know. And how is it assisting judges? We don't know further. So it's similar to the replication of the system, in which today quite often we hear so much about the judges' library in the Supreme Court by itself. And I've seen sometimes when I was practicing, the door was a little ajar, and as a young lawyer I would peek in, but I wouldn't be permitted in, right? So I would always wonder what's inside. Now technology is offering us all a chance of looking behind the judicial veil in a way, and hoping to improve greater public trust. So transparency in deployment is what is needed. There are several people who work at digital rights non-profit centers, such as the AI Now Institute, Data in Society, specifically centered in foreign countries, who also look at how these interactions will result inside the judicial system. There'll be specific uses which will be permitted. There's specific uses which will be frowned upon. For instance, will we be comfortable with court judgments and daily orders being catalogued with a confidence score for judges who give bail more often than others in economic, in certain classes of cases? Will we be comfortable with the deployment of artificial intelligence, which is only cataloging what is the efficiency of a judge in terms of case disposal, without getting into the much more deeper aspect of whether there has been a clear application of mind to each individual case to assess and apply the standards, and whether those processes will be designed over a period of time through inputs by experts. Now, artificial intelligence is again something which we do need, because the Indian court system lacks efficiency. But it should not actually replicate the human function of decision making. This is also because the system is not even up to a system of maturity, where for instance, what are called as petty offenses such as traffic offenses, which result in compoundable offenses in which you can pay a fine, need to be taken with a greater degree of restraint. This comes not only from international experience, but also comes from our own shared understanding of how sometimes law enforcement operates. So perpetuating certain older systems of discrimination, inequality are real concerns here. It's not the killer robots from Terminator. It is our own human frailties which will get institutionalized in artificial intelligence, which we need to look out for. And the second is, artificial intelligence at that same time should not be discouraged. It is a very powerful transformative technology for fulfilling our constitutional values of social justice, one which we are not being able to do reasonably given our present court system. So this is a challenge, especially for younger lawyers. For instance, just in this chat panel, I see two questions here. Will you discuss the impact of NLP systems on argument formation during a case? For certain commercial matters which are subject to arbitration, this may make very good sense. It may also be extremely efficient, for instance, to offer certain facilities to litigants as well. Bring transparency processes for ensuring that you can possibly, but looking at the larger incentives and system designs, that will be important. But for instance, crime reporting and tracking systems, which rely on facial recognition in Uttar Pradesh in India, is a deployment which will be fraught with danger. So artificial intelligence is a system of technology. It is a tool, and we need to constantly examine how will we build it into a system which will be aligned with our constitutional freedoms. One small comment on access. We need to always remember, and this goes back to every comment I've made here, that large parts of India remain underserved and disconnected from the internet. In fact, there is a sharp urban-rural divide which persists. As per the teleconnectivity reports, there is even the absence of basic back-end infrastructure, which is there in close to 34,000 Indian villages. We need to always remember this. And it comes at a time, for instance, where vaccination for the 18 to 45 age category is only open through online application. So again, technology can help, but we need to always look at that it cannot be a replacement, and it cannot lead to a complete solution, because there are communities, vast communities, in fact majority of our country still remains underserved from the smartphone by itself and high-speed internet connection.
Thank you, Apar. I think it really opens our mind as to there is technology, but do the right people have an access to it, and whether they can actually implement and integrate it in their day-to-day life. Like you gave the example of the vaccines. We know that there's been a great rush in terms of getting those slots fulfilled. But for some reason, most of the Indians, like you mentioned, do not have the access to the internet to go ahead and fill their slots and get access to the vaccine. That's one sort of an example you shared here. So, I would actually direct the conversation to Dean here, that, sir, amongst this sort of anxiety, in terms of what the future of the academics looks like, especially in law schools, why do you think students should start thinking about law now? And, how can law schools actually promote diversity and inclusion? It may or may not have a technological implication, but you could, share some examples from that end.
Yes, and I definitely think that the sooner a student can determine their professional direction, the sooner they can start preparing. And the thing about preparation is that preparation is good until you change your mind. So I always tell students, there's some core fundamental things you should always do as you prepare to transition from youth to adulthood to the profession. And that's always work on your skill set, writing well, communicating well, digesting large sums of information, and which is another way that technology, when properly used, can be helpful. With a smartphone, you have access to an entire world and library at your fingertips at all times. You're always able to interact and get news sources. So there is always an opportunity to grow and learn. And the important part about that is that because there is so much information that's available to us now, we have to always sift through and learn to find legitimate and reasonable sources to learn from, and filter that information into our own understanding, and then better design a pathway into whatever profession a person may be interested in. Specifically towards law, there are certain things that lawyers have to do, and that's to read and write well. So even if a student isn't sure what practice area they may want to go into, they can start now in strengthening those skill sets so that no matter what eventual practice area they get into, then they have the fundamental skills and confidence in their skill so that when they enter the profession, they're better prepared for it than if they had not prepared that skill set. Once you get into law school, I always encourage students to be open-minded. A lot of times we'll start with an idea, but then you'll get exposed to another lawyer who does a practice area that you've never been exposed to, or you'll be inspired by a program or a conversation with a colleague, and it will spark an interest. And more importantly, a law school's job is to expose students to various areas of the law in many different directions and many different practice areas, but also many different pathways into the law, not just law firms, but also government agencies and nonprofit organizations and think tanks. And as we get more people from diverse backgrounds into the profession, then when they're at the table, that's when we start to tear down the systems of inequality and bias that hinder growth and equity in our communities. So often, if you look at the numbers, particularly in the United States, where I'm most familiar, people of color make only 20% of lawyers in our country. Now, Hispanic Americans make up 15% of our population. African Americans make up 13% of our population, respectively. But in the profession, we're only 5% of the population of lawyers, respectively. So you can see there's still disparities that fall along socioeconomic lines, that fall along the lines of access and racial and ethnic and gender bias. Women are 51% of our population here, but only 38% of lawyers. So, we are still working on our issues of diversity and inclusion and making sure that the profession is more reflective of the society that we know it should be. But law schools, I think, are in a wonderful position of helping fix this issue in our world, by constantly doing outreach and making sure that students have access and they have knowledge, and supporting programs like Discover Law Global. It's making sure that students understand that there's a community that supports them. And as a person that is fortunate to sit at a law school that has a tremendous amount of influence, but also a tremendous amount of ability to create opportunity, by being a person of color, I also understand what it is to be a first generation lawyer. I also understand what it may be to come from a socio disadvantaged background or to come from a small town and not always have access to resources. So I'm thinking about that when I'm helping my committee and my law school make decisions about the next generation of lawyers that we bring in. And then as we diversify our students into our law school, when they enter the profession again, then they're going to serve a class of citizens that may not have been served before. They're going to go back to their hometowns. They're going to go and think about setting their rates at a price point where it doesn't exclude the majority of the population because they can't afford good quality legal education. We infuse the notion that lawyers can't just work for economic enrichment, but they have to work for justice and equality and inclusion. And as more students and more lawyers like that enter the profession, then the profession has to change. As more lawyers of color become partners in law firms, as more women become partners in law firms, then they look to bring in other diverse perspectives. And then while we're seeing growth, and I can promise you it definitely needs to speed, and we definitely need to see more, I think that we are definitely at an inflection point in our world where I think we're putting real policies, procedures, and action in place to make sure that not only the legal profession, but the medical profession and various other professions and technology-based careers are serious about the notion of diversity and inclusion and not just giving it lip service. And while we may be at this point now, I definitely think that artificial intelligence will help that. Even from the legal profession, if you think about it, a lawyer, artificial intelligence can do first level pleadings now. It can write a complaint and it can write an answer. It can help with legal research. It can reduce the amount of time that a lawyer has to place for one client, which means that the lawyer can help more clients, or at the very minimum, the lawyer can rest and spend more time with their family, which creates better quality of life, which means that they're happier lawyers. So there's phenomenal ways that I think AI will transform our profession. But at the law school level, our job is to make sure that we provide optimism about the profession, being able to forecast where we see the profession coming from, but also the talent that we see on the horizon in our students and our applicants, and knowing that our job is to be that bridge, I think is a phenomenal place. And I encourage any student that's on this call to really be excited about the future of this profession. There's so many things that are changing, and there are practice areas that, for example, cigarette litigation or asbestos litigation in the US was a really big thing a decade ago, but as it starts to wane, as there's precedent and case law that now guides that type of legal practice, there are emerging areas like cybersecurity and privacy law that are going to continue to grow and blossom and create other areas of law that will need the next generation of lawyers to become experts and to become knowledgeable, and then to help put regulations and rules and case law in place that will help form and guide our society. So it's an exciting time, I think, to go to law school with this tremendous opportunity. I think that 2020, with all the bad things that happened because of the pandemic, there were some amazing things that happened from a technological standpoint as well. I think our society jumped forward about 10 years as far as our comfort with technology and video conferencing and doing things online. And once we're comfortable with it, there's no way that we can go back. So now we have to figure out how to comfortably integrate that into our world when it successfully opens back up. But I think that again generates tremendous opportunity. So as a student, I think it's a wonderful time to be creative, to use what you've learned as far as your education, but also just the creativity as who you are as an individual, and try to find your niche, not only in the profession, but just in our society in general, because there's so many available resources. But I do concede and I do agree with Mr. Gupta that not everyone has the same level of access. So that's where those who are in positions of power have to work together for a global societal advancement where we're getting technology and resources to communities that are underserved, because the only way that we will have equality and justice in our society is when everyone has access to the basic fundamental tools that will help them gain education and resources and a stable and an elevated quality of life.
Thank you, sir, for that. I think you've really incorporated most aspects of the discussion. And when it comes to marginalized community, whether it's the US or India, most of these communities have faced, discrimination for so many years and are still, facing that sort of a discrimination. Like you mentioned about, the number of women representation in the legal fraternity in the US. I would say there are similar tracks when I compare it to India as well, maybe even lesser in terms of the percentage you mentioned. And that also brings me to Professor Saket here, because I would want to highlight like university like UPS is actually offering scholarships to girls for their undergraduate program. So they are taking that sort of steps to make sure that there is some sort of a diversity and inclusivity in the legal profession. So, Professor Saket, how do you think law schools can actually better in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion in the legal profession? And do you think that AI actually helps in mitigating bias?
Yeah. So, as you rightly said, so we have this girl child scholarship for all the girl students who apply in our university and who qualify for that. There are certain criteria for that, but 20% scholarship is for all the girls, and that is just keeping in view uh, the historical perspective and the position specifically, as you said, the when we talk about technology, when we talk about access, when we talk about inclusion, what we also need to keep in mind is this creating these fair systems, specifically when we are designing such technology frameworks or AI frameworks. If you look at this ITU study also, which sort of examines the woman in AI. So there also this came up with these things that when you have these voice translation systems, so if you say something which is related to a nurse, it will automatically say she, and well, it is something which relates to an engineer, the translation will be he. So these type of biases, which somewhere are there because of some design flaw, which is not intentional, I will say, which is something which has there in the system imbibed over a period of years. So how to look at those designs flaw? So therefore, developing those systems where fairness is very important and looking at some techniques where you de-bias already biases which are there so that those biases are not amplified. So these type of de-biasing techniques, and also looking at how we can enhance fairness in not. So that's why it is important to ensure the representation of these set of people. It applies, I'm talking about research which was focused on women. It applies to people where the divide is due to maybe education. The divide can be due to race, class, religion, nationality. So how to ensure that these biases are not there? And that will happen once there is access, once there is representation, and these human biases, these can be conscious or unconscious human biases, which, of course, if not checked at this point of time, because of this artificial intelligence, as Apar was already discussing this thing, so there will be amplification through artificial intelligence of these biases, and therefore we need these systematic interventions so that these distortions can be de-biased from the system and we develop. Focus should be on developing fair systems, and therefore the role comes of the legal fraternity also and legal education system also. And if you look at, so I'm connecting this with the legal education, specifically if you look at the National Education Policy of India, this was released in July 2020, and this is the third set of policy. Means since independence 1947, there have been, this is the third policy. And after Indian economic reforms of 1991, this is the first policy which is talking about national education policy. And here the focus is, again, I'm focusing only on the law aspects of it. only one paragraph of this policy talks about legal education. And if you look at this single paragraph, this paragraph focuses not only on you know technologies, wider access, timely delivery of justice, but it also talks about that all these things should be there, keeping in view the constitutional values. So justice, whether it be social, economic, or political, it should be based on instrumentation so that democracy and rule of law is enhanced. So setting this broader agenda of legal education in India, of course, it will take time for us to really apply all these, to attain these long goals which have been set up by this policy in para 20.4. That is good because it talks about future lawyers. A single paragraph which contains all these things, which talks about future lawyers also, which talks about how they should focus on building these systems where democracy and rule of law. So somewhere it is talking about these new technologies like artificial intelligence and ensuring that access and representation is there so that we build democratic uh, techno-legal systems also, which has representation from all these groups, so that there are no biases. And when these biases are not there, of course, more representation and more fairness in the systems to come.
Thank you, Professor, for that. We're running a little off time, so I'll just take one last question for Swati, and then we can open the questions for the audience. They have such lovely questions, and I do want to address most of them on the session. So, Swati, just if you could add to what Professor Saket was mentioning, that in what way these stakeholders in the legal fraternity can help in taking this mission forward when it comes to inclusivity and diversity in law.
So I think the intervention is something that is needed at all steps. So first, the scholarships that are given, they are mostly merit-based scholarships. That if you score a certain percentage, you will get a scholarship. Now, but merit is a very flawed concept when it is viewed as just a percentage in an exam, which is primarily English driven, which is primarily driven by static GK questions and diagram based questions which people with visual impairment cannot uh, answer. So firstly, the scholarship needs to be need-based scholarship or at the best merit come need-based scholarship. That is the very basic step that can be taken. Another intervention is this is just for diversity, but then we talk about inclusion. Okay, so when we're talking about inclusion, we need English training and bridge courses for students who have come from diverse backgrounds in a manner that there is no prejudice attached to those who are taking those courses. And we need mentorship models within law schools where students are mentoring students from diverse backgrounds. We need internships, which are internships play an important part in the legal education. So we need internship programs which give internship to people from diverse background as opposed to somebody at a certain law firm, so you get an internship or you can speak very good English, which is a learned skill, something which I also picked up. So you get an internship. So these are just some of the basic things that can be done. At ITIA, what we try to do is we, in absence of these changes being there in the system, implemented ourselves. Because there are certain schools which give fee waiver, but for rest of them, we arrange scholarship. We have a active scholar development program through which we do trainings, mentorship, help them with internship. And then the results are beautiful because we go on to see them from being a diverse range of things, working with their communities, to working in law firms, to even pursuing music. So when we are talking about AI and technology and the bias being something that can be taken up from the society and being percolated down to the technology itself, one of the important parts is that the people who are making this technology should come from diverse backgrounds because only then they can suitably understand and represent the issues faced by different people. So these are the kind of intervention that we can make, and that's why these interventions are important. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you. I really hope the stakeholders do take due note of these things. And even we at LSAC would want to have a sort of an examination where a student has complete access in terms of viewing the questions, in terms of, answering it in a way that can help them or enable them, getting to the right path. That is definitely something we are looking at in the future. So I'll just quickly go to the Q&A section. I know most of you have actually answered a few questions in the blog, but I would want you to address a few. And the first one I would actually direct it to Apar. Here we have Sneha. She is asking that do you think AI systems can independently handle situations that take a lot of thought of higher ranking judges? I think you did address a little bit in the conversation, but if you could give an in-depth thing that, okay, AI can be completely independent in certain cases, maybe on procedural laws, where it doesn't require a lot of, human intervention.
So I think firstly the process leads to uh, what kind of result needs to be the question. Is it for appraisal itself? So what we have found in even situations where system design is there to play the role of gradation for employee, for a supervisor, and provide recommendations, has been that it's not up to the degree of maturity for deployment at present, because these interactions are complex. Why a person is late, why a person has taken certain time off, and we don't need to look at the judiciary. Let's itself look at all the management literature which comes from the top tech companies. So I was recently reading this book by Reid Hoffman on what is the Netflix culture, which is a very high performing company actually. And if it's not implementing AI to in fact pick out the highest performers within Netflix, I wouldn't recommend that for the judiciary either. The second thing is AI by itself is a bundle of deployments and technologies, and it depends on how you use it and where you use it. Just saying these two things, I'll end, but the larger question is with respect to appraisal of judges and how well they are performing, how badly they are performing. All of that needs to be considered much more holistically. I think technology will play a part there, but it will be a very small part. Sometimes there is an inherent bias where we see a very large problem which has existed historically and structurally, to look at technology as the instant solution to it. But this is a flawed understanding and may also contribute to the creation of independent problems, because firstly there is a system of misdiagnosis, and secondly any new system which is implemented quite often comes with its own sets of values and may pose problems. I'm sorry I'm coming across as a Luddite, but I'm not. I just wanted to indicate that there is a very high degree of complexity.
Thank you, Apar, for addressing that. The other question is by Dipanshu. They want to know that what would the future of AI look in the Indian criminal system, and is the Indian legal system lagging behind in terms of incorporating AI in comparison to developed legal system like the UK or the US? So probably the first question could be addressed by Professor Saket or Apar again here, and probably Professor McGee can answer the comparison in case the developed systems are very well versed, or the developed countries are very well versed with the AI system as compared to India. So Professor Saket, would you want to take this up?
Yeah. So as far as I told initially, so that what we are right now looking at is like ODR system, online dispute resolution systems and all. So here the focus is only on at the experimentation stage. We are looking at disputes which can be taken care of by AI, but not those disputes. As criminal justice system applying AI, I don't think that is a really possibility. As you see the comments from the Supreme Court judges also, that AI is there to facilitate facilitate the system and bring some efficiencies in the system. So I see much implementation of AI in specific looking at the enforcement perspective, and because if enforcement perspective is taken care of, specifically applying this for tracking, and there are the privacy concerns there, of course, but if the systems are robust enough to check those biases, of course, those tracking these things can help, and this in turn can help in a better justice delivery system, criminal justice delivery system, because that is the key challenge in the criminal justice delivery system in India regarding the evidence and all those things. So in coming years, of course, it is quite challenging to really apply. I must think maybe Apar likes to add on this.
Yeah,
So over to
I
you.
just wanted to add 2 points to it. The first is that, again, continuing with the theme that Apar is a Luddite. Okay. So the first is that we don't need to apply AI systems in very high risk environments, because their uh, tendency to harm people in those environments will be very high. Okay. And in the criminal justice system, there are documented biases of people who are poor, who come from racial and minority based backgrounds, who are already policed in a sense which is disproportionate to the actual offense. Now, is this a parse woke bias talking, or is it actually documented? It's documented, because if you look at the correctional offender management profiling for alternate sanction system, which is a algorithm called Compass in the US justice system to decide sentences. A study, influential study, found that it suffered from two serious issues of high error rates, 39% for recidivism and an astonishing 80% for violent recidivism. And it had high error rates of predicting when black people would reoffend. Was in a study called Sentence by Numbers. And secondly is what I would like to also suggest is look at EU and how it's deploying these systems. There is a recent draft report on how AI and data can be utilized and in what deployments it should not be used. I'll stop here.
And I think there was a relative question of how that is maybe compared, or some of the issues that we're dealing with as we integrate AI into our system. But I will highlight the points made by Professor Shamar and also Mr. Gupta, is that there are inherent biases in the system. So I think AI itself is the byproduct of a system that is biased. And until we can tease some of the issues out of the system, then the bias it's susceptible that the bias can be in artificial intelligence as well. And the way that you correct the system is by, one, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that there's diverse perspectives at the table, but then also holding the system accountable. And I think that's what you're seeing happening in the US at a very large and at a very street level right now. Not only are there protests in the streets to racial violence and racial injustice and police brutality, but there's also policy conversations being had at various state, federal, and local levels. There's policy implementation and changes that will happen regarding how communities are policed. But you also have to also understand that the data born from those communities from prior policing structures are what's fueling the information that's going into AI right now. So that means that the data points that are going into artificial intelligence is to some degree biased. So until you can create a system where the data going in is fair, then the system won't be fair. So we're going through an evolution ourselves of how we can safely and comfortably and fairly integrate technology that will make the system more fair, balanced, and efficient, while also dismantling a system that has been biased, unfair, and inefficient up to this point. And unfortunately, it's going to be some growing pains. I think that there will be, once again, a need for various perspectives and for people that have been impacted by the bias to be at the table and to be a part of the conversation, which once again brings me back to access to law school. The communities that are underserved are usually represented by individuals that remind them of themselves or that were born from those communities, but they have to be trained. They have to be given access. They have to enter the profession. And then part of what we hope that they'll do is return to those communities and take up the mantle and fight those fights, because there are no better informed voices than the voice of experience.
Thank you, sir, for those comments. We just have a couple of, 2-3 minutes to wind up now. So I just would want each of the panelists to give one last comment on, what would you want to see the future of AI to look like, and, how would that benefit in terms of diversity and inclusivity? So Swati, we could start off with you.
Sure. So when we talk about AI, I think we need something that is created by a group of people which are from diverse backgrounds itself. And we often have a tendency to throw technology as a solution to the problem, and without realizing its danger. And once we apply technology to a solution, we assume that the result is objective and fair, and we need to be cautious about it and understand that it has inherent biases like we do. So work towards creating a more fair system.
Thank you, Swati. Professor Saket.
Yes, thank you. So I think we should aim at crafting responsible AI systems, and of course we need to see there are benefits to it. So we need to de-bias the system first, the biases which are already there, to correct them, and then to ensure that ethics, accountability, then transparency. These are the few things: fairness, non-discrimination. So these are the few key principles where I think on which this new responsible AI system should be based. Specifically, if these key principles are followed, then we can have a safe and reliable AI ecosystem with representation for all and which caters to everyone's well-being.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Apar, over to you.
I'll just second everything Swati, Saket, and other participants have said through the course of this conversation, and emphasize that the participation of people who create these systems, them being on the table as decision makers, as stakeholders, is the most important and primary function to serve. We need to bring people within the fold to ensure diversity in the design of the participants, in their participation, principally at the decision-making level. So just state that. That's the most important thing, even when we look at AI.
Definitely, Apar. Thank you. Mr. McGee, would you want to conclude with the final points?
Well, in some way, I'll say be optimistic. I think this is a wonderful time to be alive. I think it's a wonderful time to enter the profession. The great thing about artificial intelligence is that it's still in its infancy, and it's evolving drastically and dramatically and at the speed of light, but there's still the opportunity to influence. And the wonderful thing about having access to technology is that it has essentially made the world flat. We all have access to social media. We have access to the internet, not all, but most. And if you do have it, realize that you can use your access for influence, read, research, but then, put your opinion out there, help shape the thought on artificial intelligence, help shape the course and the evolution, because artificial intelligence is not settled, it's evolving. And if you see it as an evolution, then also understand your power to help in that evolution, to steer not only the technology, but our society in the direction that you want it to be. The beautiful thing about the profession of law is that there's a certain responsibility tied into the profession to steer society. There's a certain expectation that as a lawyer, you will guide those and put rules, regulations, policies in place that will help protect those who don't always know they need protection, but also guide a society in its growth for the betterment of society. At the root of our profession, that's what it's for. So we need individuals that are inspired to do that. We need individuals that are committed to the hard work of that, who are committed to developing their voice and speaking for the voiceless, or those who have a perspective that is sometimes undermined, and making sure that as many different perspectives and voices are at the table, because that's where I think justice and equality and fairness exists, when everyone has an opportunity to speak, and then the society takes the varied experience and the varied perspectives and takes a giant step forward. And we're at a time in our evolution where we are 10 years from now will be drastically different than where we sit today. And I think it's a wonderful time to be alive and a wonderful time to enter our profession. So I really encourage anyone that is considering becoming a lawyer to look at the law schools in India, to look at the law schools in North America and the US. And we would love to see you apply. We would love to have you as a part of our institutions. And I definitely encourage you. And we need you to enter this profession because, I'm getting old. There'll be a period of time where I hang up my legal robe and I decide that I'm not going to practice anymore. We'll need to turn it over to very qualified individuals. And I know that many of you are on this phone call, and I look forward to seeing you join the profession one day.
Thank you, Professor, for those encouraging words. I just want to add by saying that let's consider artificial intelligence or technology as an enabler to help our legal system to work in a fair manner. I really hope this session, gave the audience a slight peek into what AI and law looks like. At LSEC Global, also, we are driven by this goal to expand, diversify, and strengthen the legal system. And because of the very firm belief, we make sure that these resources are actually available to the law aspirants to promote a broad-based diversity in legal education across the legal profession. I did see one comment where a student was fearing the fact that LSEC is creating more gaps rather than giving them, more access. But I would want to say that in case you need some sort of an assistance, even when it comes to, a laptop to take the LSAT examination, please do write into us. We are providing that sort of a platform to the students to ensure that the test taking process is smooth and efficient. I would also like to highlight that today is the last day to close the registration. So I request the students to register for the examination today by midnight. We also are offering test prep materials via LSEC Law Prep platform, where you can practice and strengthen your LSAT India score. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, to support your law school journey, we are offering 2 scholarships worth rupees 4 lakh each. One is to the LSAT India topper, and the second would be based on the essay competition. And some of the aspects of the topic we did discuss and cover up in today's webinar. So the last date for the submission of the essays is 1st June 2021. More details are also available on the website. I once again thank the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules to motivate the law aspirants today. This topic is a little difficult to understand, but I think it's important to address the issues from day one so that we're more comfortable in terms of talking about the changes happening in AI and technology. I also thank the audience members for their active participation. Some great questions coming in. In case we haven't addressed those, please write into us. We will definitely get back to you on the same. Till then, I would request everybody to stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much for the webinar today.